So, Anna, this is a great question. How did people thousands of years ago, like Old Testament, eat bread as one of their main food sources and be okay? You're making a huge assumption that they ate bread as one of their main food sources. But even let's just assume that that is true, which nobody knows, because you go back, pre-Jesus, right? Old Testament, pre-Jesus. You're still going back to a lot of cultures were not predominantly grain-based in their diets. They had agrarian farming, but many of them were still eating heavy meats and vegetables. And there's archaeological evidence that proves that. But there's also archaeological evidence that proves that the oldest known case of celiac disease is 2000 BC. So we know this was going on then as well. I think one of the romantic notions that we have in society, and many cultures have this romantic notion that somehow the past was better, the food was healthier, people were more robust. I don't know that we could really make those claims. I think those are notions that we cling to, but I don't think anybody could prove that to be true or false either way. And I don't think we have any evidence that states that. But I know we've got evidence that states that celiac disease existed then, so we know this problem has been around a really long time. I think where a lot of people struggle today, and it's become more heightened and more aware, is because many people today, their primary staple food is grain, right? 50% of calories consumed in the US alone come from wheat. And that's been studied. And that doesn't include the calories from corn or rice. And so if you look at the average, at least American, and probably this is true of the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the industrialized world, you look at the average and the quantity of calories that are consumed that are grain-based, most cultures in these modern regions are anywhere from 65 to 70+% of their diets coming largely from grain. That wasn't true. That wasn't true 30 years ago. It wasn't true 50 years ago. This is a trend as industrialized countries have subsidized through taxpayer dollars, have subsidized the growth of grain as a mass food to feed the masses. And so we have more of it. We have people eating more of it. We see people reacting more to it because it is a dose over time quantity issue as well. I noticed some medications ingredients include some corn. Yeah, very much so. Probably one of the most common meds that have corn in it. And I see this be a huge holdup for people that have Hashimoto's. Hypothyroidism is the levothyroxine has corn. And so it's the very thing that can trigger Hashimoto's, which is grain, is in the very medication that they're being prescribed to treat the disease. And this is why a lot of those people won't recover or won't ever get beyond it. Let's see here. Let's go down on the right, I'm sorry, and then, there we go. Thoughts, I think I answered that. Thoughts on wild rice. You can eat it, but I'm not a fan of it personally. It's just because I don't care for the way it tastes, but you can eat it. It is gluten-free. What do I think of the keto diet? I think the keto diet is, how do I want to put this? It's a antidote for the carbohydrate toxic diet, but it is not a solution long term for everyone. There's certain people that do well on keto. If you've got a massive tumor and you're trying to treat your cancer, keto's good. If you've got epileptic seizure disorder, keto can be pretty good. But ultimately, keto is not a long-term solution for most people. It's an antidote to toxic high carbohydrate diet. So a lot of people go keto and feel really well because they've cut back on their carbohydrates, and so they're no longer flooding their body and elevating their blood sugar and making their blood like syrup and just loaded with glucose. So going keto to a large extent solves that problem short term, but long term, your body needs to be able to go either direction. You should be able to get into ketosis. You should also be able to extrapolate energy from carbohydrate. And you should have good balance between carbs, fats, and proteins in your diet, as opposed to being overbalanced on fat and underbalanced on carbohydrate. What about rice protein and protein powders? Yeah, same thing, Cheryl. No good. Don't recommend it. I've heard, let's see. Yeah, I like that commentary. Mark says, I've heard that sumo wrestlers eat a big bowl of rice 6 times a day to gain weight, but many of these great athletes die before the age of 50. Yep, that's true. So again, you know, you can use a toxic food to achieve a goal. It doesn't necessarily mean that the end outcome is going to be happy. Let's see. So Lena says, okay, so looking at No Grain, No Pain, the book, and I know based on my questionable celiac history and mold exposures, I need to get on the bandwagon, but it's overwhelming. Should we work with a medical team to run starting nutritional testing, etc., before jumping in? You don't have to, Lena. Just if you really want to just jump in, follow No Grain, No Pain. Phase 1, 15 days, get on to phase 2, and just stay on phase 2. There's no danger in it. You're not going to become malnourished if you're in phase 2 of the No Grain, No Pain diet indefinitely. It's a balanced diet. And if you feel better and you're noticing leaps and bounds in your health, you'll have an answer directly. Now, if you don't and you still find yourself struggling, that's when you work with a doctor. That's when you get on board and you get somebody to help you run the right tests, look at your nutrition in the right way. But it's free, right, to follow along No Grain, No Pain. It doesn't cost, I mean, maybe it costs you a copy of the book, but really you could technically go check it out at the library. So in that regard, it wouldn't cost you anything. But yeah, that's where I would start. Let's go down more on the left side. Can mold mimic gluten sensitivity? What if somebody is strictly grain-free, only eating organic for 6 months, but symptoms are still present? You may have a mold issue. Mold is a very, very common, we'll just say, inhibitor of good progress, right? And a lot of people have mold and gluten. Remember I said earlier, I was talking about yeast, and I said that yeast can produce proteins that mimic gluten. Well, yeast is a type of mold. Now, there are other types of mold. Yeast is a type of mold that lives in our GI tracts. It could live in our body. But you can also have environmental molds that you're being exposed to. And the symptoms of mold toxicity can mimic, in a very big way, the symptoms of gluten sensitivity. And many people have both. They're both gluten sensitive, but they're also in toxic mold. I've been in toxic mold. It's no fun. It's no fun at all. You get super sick and you don't know why. So if your diet is super clean, you know, the next step, in my opinion, if you're still struggling, is get with a good functional practitioner and get testing done. Don't guess. Test, don't guess. I mean, if you read No Grain, No Pain, I wrote an entire chapter on testing, not guessing, because so many people, you know, they treat their health, you know, in such a way where they're guessing at it. And again, I get it. You're doing your best. You're trying to take your best guess. But when you get to a point where it isn't working, don't let a year or 2 or 3 or 5 go by where that damage just accumulates. Because if you do, it's a lot harder to make a comeback, even with the right accuracy. And so you want to get on top of it as quickly as possible. So Barbara says, if my blood celiac panel came back with abnormal IgA and IgE in the IgG portion, and I also have tested to have an allergy to wheat and corn, what steps would you take next to obtain an official celiac diagnosis? Why? Why do you need an official celiac diagnosis? Let's think about that just for a minute. This is a good question. Is there benefit to knowing that you have celiac? What's the difference between gluten sensitivity and celiac disease? Very simply put, everyone with celiac disease is gluten sensitive, but not everybody with gluten sensitivity will develop celiac disease. And I see people get stuck in this trap where they want a diagnosis. They want that celiac diagnosis to convince them to change their diet. And I'm not saying that's you, Barbara, but what I am saying is psychologically, you don't need the diagnosis. You just need to know whether or not you're gluten sensitive. And if you have that information, it doesn't matter whether you're celiac. Because what are you going to do differently? If you're celiac, or if you have what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, right? What's the difference? The difference is the manifestation of how gluten, creates inflammation in your body. For some people, the inflammation happens in the small intestine, and that just so happens to be diagnosed as celiac disease for many. But for many others, and as a matter of fact, far more people have non-celiac gluten sensitivity than have celiac disease. So seeking out the celiac diagnosis doesn't benefit you, because there's no benefit to saying, hey, I'm celiac versus, hey, I'm non-celiac gluten sensitive. And so maybe you could clarify for me, but I just don't think there's a benefit for you other than you expose yourself to another medical procedure. Think about what an upper GI is. What is an upper GI? They take a fiber optic camera that has been up thousands of other people, okay? And it sounds gross, but this is the reality, right? The equipment is reused. And they clean the equipment, but the equipment is reused. But what if the people that had that equipment in them before you did were really sick and had really nasty bugs, and the guy who's supposed to clean that equipment just didn't do a good job the day you went in to have your test done? It's a risk. That's why when you go into a GI office and they say, yeah, we're going to do an endoscopy, it's why they give you this thick page of forms that say sign this or we won't do it, because they're basically saying you agree that these are all the risks, right? They're giving you spelling out all the risks of that procedure. And one of those risks is infecting you, right? Infecting you with somebody else's bacteria. And where the nastiest bugs in the world live is in hospitals. So, if you know you're gluten sensitive and you're already following a gluten-free diet, and you're saying, okay, well, I need to get the celiac diagnosis, you have to ask yourself, what is the risk of knowing that by doing that procedure versus the benefit of knowing that? And if the answer is really not a benefit, then make a decision that you're most comfortable with. But again, in my opinion, there's no benefit to knowing you have celiac versus you don't, unless you're trying to track an already pre-existing known case of villus atrophy just to see whether or not you've had villus atrophy recovery. But even then, remember, biopsies are not 100% accurate, so you can get false positives and or false negatives on them. Rachel's asking about ideas on emerging food storage. Rachel, go back and watch our show on preparation. I did an entire show on food prep, and there's a lot of ideas in that for you. So basically, June says, what carbs are good for celiac patients to eat? Root vegetables. There's lots of those, right? Beets, tapioca, cassava, potato. You can eat those things. They're fine to eat. You just, again, depending on who you are and whether or not you're allergic to other things, but there's plenty to eat. A lot of people, you get overwhelmed, and I understand why. It's a total change from what you're typically used to doing, but don't get overwhelmed. Just baby step it. You may not be perfect today, but move in a righter direction every day. A lot of people, they get so overwhelmed that they choose to never start, and so when you don't start your journey, you're guaranteed the same outcome that you have today, which is illness. But when you take baby steps in the right direction, maybe it won't be perfect, but each day you do a little bit better. Each day it gets a little bit easier. Each day you feel a little bit more energetic, where you're more capable of making better decisions and more capable of cooking and prepping your own food. It's a process for some people. Don't get overwhelmed by it. So Huda asks, I know you recommend a third, carbs, fats, proteins every day. What maximum net carbs do you recommend? It's not a maximum, because I recommend a third as a general place to start, but that doesn't mean that third is perfect for everyone. And let me give you an example. You take somebody who exercises aggressively, they may need more carbohydrate depending on what kind of exercise they're doing, or they may need more protein for that recovery. So a lot of that, we start with what's called the rule of thirds, because it's balance. But depending on what a person's doing in their life, we may make manipulations or modifications to that rule. Are mushrooms not a good idea to eat because of the fungi? No, mushrooms are fine. Mushrooms have a lot of medicinal benefits, especially the right ones. Would I speak to organic rice concentrate? I think it's just a way of saying we took rice that was organically grown and we created a slurry with it and we put it in these vitamins as a cheap filler. That's basically what that means. So if you're, again, if you're celiac or gluten sensitive and you've got rice in your supplement, put it down. It's not worth it. Let's see, my food sensitivities have been getting worse. I can't seem to eat without causing severe asthma attack, angry elephant on my chest, tightness. I have seen an allergist and I'm trying to avoid the foods he said I'm allergic to, but I continue to have these attacks after eating. I was hoping for answers truly by seeing the GI specialist. Well, go see a GI specialist, but what'll probably happen is they'll scope you, tell you that you have inflammation somewhere, but they won't give you any solution or any reason as to why you're having aggressive reactions every time you eat. I mean, the problem in the field, in my opinion, the problem in gastroenterology is they tell you what is wrong without telling you why it's wrong, right? Which is basically useless information in my opinion, because if they tell you, oh, your gut's inflamed, okay, great. Why is it inflamed? What's causing the inflammation? We don't know, but take this antacid, right? And do it for the rest of your life and don't ask me any more questions because that's a limitation of what I can give you. That's a very common scenario in a GI doctor's office. Now, I'm not saying all GI doctors are like that, and maybe yours is not, but if they're not running advanced specialized tests beyond the scope, you're probably not going to find the reason. You're probably just going to find what it looks like, but you're not going to necessarily find why it looks that way. Let's see here. Okay. Is quinoa safe? JC wants to know. No, quinoa, there's actually been a few studies on quinoa. Quinoa mimics gluten to such a great degree that many people with gluten issues still react to quinoa as well. Even though it's technically not a grain, it's a pseudo grain. JC, I would recommend that you go on glutenfreesociety.org. We've got some really robust articles about quinoa and some of the problems with it, and that might help you as well. Are there any noodles I can eat that are truly gluten-free? I've seen noodles made from almond. I've seen noodles made from kelp. Noodles made from mung bean. So, I mean, there definitely are options that are out there. Again, this is part of the learning curve where at first it seems overwhelming, but the more of these things that you learn, the easier it can become. Lynn's asking, what happened to your food sensitivity test, Dr. O? It's still coming, Lynn. Devil's in the details. We're trying to work those final bits out, so be patient with me. What medicine should I take if levothyroxine isn't good for my thyroid? That's between you and your doctor, Shelley. The question, though, that you want to ask your doctor is, hey, I'm gluten sensitive. One of the things you can ask is for a compounded version of levothyroxine. Meaning that the doctor writes the prescription into a compounding pharmacy where they can take the same drug that you need and they can make it without the corn-based fillers. And that's going to get you a closer step in the right direction. That's a good place to start, though. So Juan says, people didn't have an issue with wheat before wheat was GMO, and that's just wrong. That's a misconception, Juan. There was no GMO in 1943 when celiac disease, the actual cause of celiac disease, was found to largely be responsibly contributed to by wheat. That was 1943 before any GMO existed. So you're wrong. Like, I can respect that you have an opinion, but you're wrong. GMO is not the cause of what we're seeing. Now, it's certainly not helping things, and it certainly may be an exacerbatory factor, but it is not the cause. Does Synthroid have gluten? It does. It has corn in it, corn gluten. So again, going back to what I just answered a minute ago, which is you can get it compounded. Talk with your prescribing doctor about that possibility. Is it true that celiac disease people can drink or handle A2 milk? Yes and no. Not all can. A2 milk's a step in a better direction, but many celiacs still have milk allergy. That's a super common thing, even with A2 milk. Can eating gluten while pregnant affect the baby throughout life? Yes. Yes, if you're eating gluten, and remember, gluten can it can pass through, right? It also passes through in the breast milk. And so I've seen cases where children were being hurt because mom was eating gluten and baby was gluten sensitive. So again, I'm not telling you not to breastfeed if you're breastfeeding. I think breastfeeding is the best thing you can do for your child. But if your child's got a gluten issue and you're eating gluten, it's better to cut that gluten out when you're breastfeeding that baby. Yeah, I like that comment. So Dahlia came back and said, so with my first 2 pregnancies, I was eating gluten and the babies were very underweight, and my third son was gluten-free and he was born normal weight. Yeah, I believe that. I mean, it's very common to see infants being born under the undue influence of gluten, having low birth weight, lower IQs, lower circumference in their head size and their brain size. Okay. What about nutritional yeast as a cause for GI issues or bloating or otherwise harmful effects? Yes, I'm not a fan of nutritional yeast. Not a fan of them at all. Question about sodium starch glycolate as a filler in Armour thyroid. Yes, it can be derived from wheat or corn. So that's another drug. Armour thyroid is another one that can definitely be problematic for some people with gluten issues. So again, the solution, talk with your prescribing doctor about potential compounding. Okay, 7:15, that means it's time to go eat dinner. Hey, thanks for spending your Monday evening with me. I appreciate it. I appreciate your, you're taking time out of your busy schedule to be here and learn. Help me help others, right? Our mission here is to save 100 million lives, and by that, we need you to share this information with people you think could benefit from it. So don't be shy with the share button. Copy or paste the URL and send it to your loved ones who you think might benefit from this information. Also, make sure you come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. Sign up for our newsletter there. It's free. If you want unfettered, uncensored information coming your way, that's the best place to make sure that you don't get censored from this information if it's something you want to get. So again, thanks for spending your Monday with me. We'll see you next Monday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Have a great evening. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.